Good evening. Thank you all for joining us this evening. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to this first kickoff of our Designing in the Time of COVID-19. This is a partnership between the Museum of Ventura County and the American Institute of Architects Ventura County chapter. We started this collaboration with the AIAVC back in 2018 when we had the Design in the Making exhibit at the museum, and we are excited to continue this dialogue about design and urban planning within our county and beyond. So at this point in time, I'd like to introduce our moderator for this evening's program. Mark Cecco is the founder and principal of Cecco Architects Incorporated. He's a native of Los Angeles, but has lived in Ventura County with his wife and 4 children for more than 30 years, Mark,
Yeah.
around 30 years. He has a Doctor of Architecture from the University of Hawaii and a Bachelor of Architecture from Cal Poly Pomona. His education experience also includes the University of Copenhagen and Harvard Graduate School of Design. His doctoral dissertation proved it possible to develop suburban housing in a sustainable, cost-efficient, community-based model. He is a licensed architect in 4 states. He has taught architecture at Woodbury University and UCLA Extension, and is currently serving as the chair of the Moorpark General Plan Advisory Committee. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mark to introduce our panelists this evening.
Thank you very much, Denise. Thank you to the museum. Thank you to AIA Ventura County for this, again, this, as you mentioned, this collaborative effort. This is really sort of great. And I'm real excited to be part of this. I like being the dumbest person in the room. So that's, I feel like I'm in that state right now, which is good. So, I was going to have a little intro first, but I'll introduce our panelists instead at first. First, we have Lynn Johnson, who's a landscape architect, Ventura local. She's had her practice since 1986. She's got projects all throughout Ventura County, and she focuses on practical, functional, personal, human-centered design that allows people to reconnect with nature on whatever level is appropriate for them. And, you know, that's really sort of critical, especially now, and fits right in with what we're going to be talking about today. Next, we have Nicholas Deitch. Nick's an architect in Ventura. Everybody knows Nick. Well, everybody knows all of the panelists except me, and you're all, because you're all Ventura, City of Ventura locals. I'm sort of the outlier as far as that goes. Nick's been in practice since 1986 with community planning, historic restoration, adaptive reuse, and mixed-use residential infill. He's also, though, a real strong proponent, and I've seen it in person, for thoughtful planning, preservation, and revitalization of communities throughout Ventura County and California overall. Next on our panel is Jeff Lambert. He's Chief Operating Officer of Ventura County Community Foundation. He's also the former Community Development Director for both the City of Ventura and the City of Oxnard. The interesting thing about Jeff Lambert is he's also a land planning consultant, which is really sort of, he's got this unusual mix of public sector and private sector experience, which really brings a lot to the table. And he's one of the people that actually gets things built, which is really great. And it's something we definitely need in Ventura County. The other thing that for me, is sort of personal thing for me though, is that all of these, although everybody's got real sort of impressive professional credentials, they're all very involved with nonprofit organizations, especially ones that involve social services. So with that, you know, thank you very much for the panelists. Thank you for everybody who's joining us. And so to start things off, I'd like to bring sort of a little bit of a historical perspective. As we're putting this together, I was thinking about how society often responds to a crisis with some very visionary idea. And that visionary idea, and a lot of times ends up coming from the design community somehow. The example that sort of came to mind was what was called the Garden City movement back in the back in the second half of the last century, the Industrial Revolution brought pollution, it brought toxic materials, it brought people living in very unsafe and unsanitary conditions because they basically lived adjacent to the factories where they worked and sometimes lived within the factories as they worked. And so an urban planner by the name of Ebenezer Howard developed what they call the Garden City movement. And basically what it separated the people from where they lived from where they had to work. And then so that was this sort of big vision of something that there was a change that needed to be made. And so that was the big vision that was going to change it. That also, there were people like Frederick Law Olmsted, who designed Central Park, also had a vision of what he wanted to do. And then later architects like Frank Lloyd Wright, Corbusier, other sort of people brought the same sort of vision to the table. And you could argue that some of those visions are what ultimately ended up giving us suburbia as we go along. The flip side to that, though, is that there have been times of crisis where things didn't get done or things didn't change. The one that comes right off the top to mind is the financial crisis we had in 2007. It was really sort of brought on by how we developed suburbia and how we financed suburbia. And what precipitated the crash was how that worked. And the problem was, after the crash, when things got back to normal, they got right back to doing exactly what they were doing before. And you could look at what happened in New Orleans after the hurricane, what happened what's happened in Puerto Rico, what happened in Haiti. Again, we had a crisis, but in those cases, we didn't do anything about it, or what we did was not visionary enough to solve that problem. So what I'd like to do is, in the context of what we're talking about, we really want to talk about what have we learned and what do we change. But I want to ask that in the context, is now a time for a visionary response to what COVID has brought about? And so based on that, I'm now done talking, which is good. And I'm actually letting somebody else do the talking. So we'll start with the questions. And we'd like to, although this is going to be more of a panel discussion, we're trying to leave as much as possible time at the end so we can actually have some of the attendees with Q&A and actually generate some more discussion. So I'm actually going to throw it out to Lynn first, even though she told me not to. So what we'll do is we'll talk sort of a micro level and work our way to a macro level. So first question at this point, and everybody can relate to this. Everyone now has a new experience or an appreciation for their own private space. As designers, what have we seen or what have you seen that has changed or adapted that we can learn from? And what further changes do you think we should see in the future, or we want to see in the future?
Does that mean it's my turn now?
Yes, it's your turn now.
Okay. Well, I think the obvious things first are people working from home and doing Zoom meetings and not, using their own space, learning about shared space, learning about a multi-use space where what was your house is now also an office. And then as we spread out into the community, you can see what we've done in communities all over, and in particular, our community that started opening restaurants, closed down the, the Main Street, and other restaurants and shops all over town, not just downtown, but we opened those up and we made walkable communities. And we've learned, these are some things that we've sort of have been trying to work towards for many, many years to make more walkable, livable communities. And this just sort of forced us to do that. And maybe there are aspects of it that aren't perfect, but I think that it has done quite a bit for creating a sense of community and developing things that we could really use moving forward. I can keep going, but maybe someone else wants to jump in.
Yeah, I actually, I reacted to Mark, your comment about whether we needed to make, by the way, that's not another Jeff Lambert on the, in the room. That's my boss coming in as me somehow. I'm not sure how that happened. That's Vanessa Bechtel sort of spying on us. No, I think your comment about whether this is a time for big, huge vision, my reaction is it's not the time for that because we'll get it wrong. If we try to, I almost, the way I look at it is we don't want to overcorrect. And go into some big new place for city building. I think we're better off at sort of adjusting it around the edges and sort of taking the things that work that have worked over the last 12 years and then allowing them to continue beyond that. I think about Ventura's outdoor dining. That was an experiment that's hugely successful on Main Street, but now they have to figure out if they're going to make it permanent or not. And that we would have more success taking something that we did in a bold, sort of a reactive way to the COVID and making it more permanent and allowing it to continue beyond the pandemic because it worked, as opposed to trying to kind of change the world in some big philosophical conversation. That's where we go from here.
And just dovetailing on that, and then maybe getting Nick to respond to this as well, though. I get that. I see how we make incremental changes. That's certainly something to do. And I guess the question following along that, though, is part of what you're saying, though, is it's too soon because we don't know what all the effects are, or are you saying it's too soon because we just don't want to raise the city and build a new one?
Yeah, I can't wait to hear what Nick has to say, but I think my mind is it's not too soon. I just, if we have to pause to sort of reimagine cities and create a new vision, we'll stop the momentum that we've taken over the last 12 months. That's sort of like I want to move to getting it done. And for cities to do that in a flexible way is uncomfortable because we like rules. And I think if we can allow cities to experiment in a more natural, sort of nimble way based on what we've done over this last year, cities can change faster than if we have to stop and figure out how to take what we learned and put it into a new policy, which we might never get done. I guess that's my reaction. Nick?
Well, yeah, I love the idea of visionary change and transformation. I remember how the Garden City idea grabbed me when I was a young college student, and I saw these amazing illustrations and ideas. But I think you're right in your assessment, Mark, that ultimately it led us to the path of suburbia and created huge problems for us because we didn't get it right. And I think we would the closing of Main Street, if the shutdown hadn't happened, we would have never got there. If it had been a proposal, an idea, hey, let's shut down Main Street, it would have been a revolution. There would have been an uprising. And yet it really is cool to see how we have adapted and adjusted through this process. This technology that we're using was at our fingertips pre-COVID, but I don't know if I had Zoomed once before the pandemic. And now it's second nature.
And just to since we were talking specifics about Main Street and Ventura, I'm old enough to have gone through when I was working in Santa Monica, the closing of the 3rd Street Promenade being closed and made an outdoor shopping mall. And then, they ended up going back to opening it back up, but opening it back up in a much more pedestrian friendly way. But that was over a 30-year time span. So it's not something that happens instantaneously. And, there had to be, political will all the way around to get that done too. So.
I even think of, for the 10 years I was at the city, we fought to do parklets and we couldn't get one done. Now the city, through the pandemic, closed the whole street for dining, and now the parklet seems old fashioned. We went so beyond that. Parklets was like a pullback, and that was a dream of ours 2 years ago.
Yeah, true.
Now, are there well, getting back to Lynn and getting back to, again, pushing this back down into the sort of granular private space, are the other things, what are some other things that you think that are, because we're working more at home, because we're being at home more and everything like that, how does that ultimately translate to the built environment from a micro perspective down the individual community, individual neighborhood, individual street, or even the house itself? How is that affected by what's going on?
Well, I would say that from a landscape architect's point of view, it's still about, creating a sense of place and a space. So if you're going to work at home, then be able to function in a place that feels comfortable and sustainable and is conducive to doing your work. And then, of course, then the challenge is if you're a parent with young children and you have your children at home, finding the balance with all that stuff, I think, is extremely difficult. If you're single or if your kids are grown, you may have more opportunity. I think there are lots of things that we need to explore, but maybe a piece of it to do with having an open mind about these changes. And some of that, and to Jeff's point about not wanting to do it now because we might screw it up, I'm wondering if my fear is if we stop it, we'll go back and we won't move forward with it. And so maybe we have to allow ourselves to have an open enough mind to change so that we can do it and we can make mistakes along the way. And then we don't backtrack and say, oh, that didn't work. But we say, okay, that little piece of it didn't work, but we still have this bigger goal of creating places that work for people, that are sustainable, that are walkable, and all the things that we as planners and designers desire. We don't give up on that. And we use this momentum to move forward, to continue to create spaces for people and design that's accessible for all people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems, and that's something I wanted to touch upon that you started, was actually about, there is a momentum, and I'm looking at not, momentum is one word for it, or another thing is just sort of a realization of, it's in the forefront of people's minds now, and they have been now exposed to a different way of doing things. They're exposed to actually walking to get to a restaurant. They've been exposed to these other sorts of things that we as designers have been thinking about for a long time. But, it's getting people out of their cars was a very big deal, and now, because the people have had to get out of their cars, now, that shifts it a little bit. And so, back to Jeff, is there now taking that step and saying, okay, is there, making those incremental changes, who's going to drive those incremental changes? Is that something that, is it going to be, there's going to be an uprising, or is it that the decision makers they've had the same experience we've had, and so now they're willing to make those kind of incremental changes?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a little bit of both. I mean, I think the users that have benefited from this experience are going to have some advocacy to make sure that the decision makers keep it going. Because this, not to focus too much on downtown Ventura, but the city council could decide, no, we're going to take the streets back.
Right.
They're not likely to do that because there's a huge amount of advocacy for that, because people love what's there and it's been hugely successful. So those voices have to be heard, so that we maintain the momentum that we've had. I think the thing that troubles me a little bit, without a little bit of manipulation or focus, is how equitable these decisions are.
Right.
We all know the stories about all the white collar workers that were able to work from home. The frontline workers are not working from home because that's not where their jobs are. And so this world of having a better place to work from home, accessible to restaurants and other services, is great for us.
Right, exactly.
But it doesn't serve the population. And so how do we make sure that everybody has access? Lynn was saying this earlier. How does everybody have access to these new benefits?
Right.
So that they benefit all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it goes to equity. It goes to inclusion.
And I actually think that's where government intervenes to some degree. That's where the government can intervene and make sure that the benefits are equally experienced by the entire population, not just those that can afford it.
Mhm.
You know.
That makes sense to me. Yeah. Equitable
I think
design.
I want to be careful. I agree with what you're saying, Jeff. I want to be careful not to overemphasize COVID in our progression, in our evolution, because we've been evolving and we've
Right.
been changing.
Yeah.
It's been probably going slower than a lot of us would like, but it's probably been going faster than a lot of others would like. And the experience of the pandemic has just kind of magnified some of the challenges and the issues, good
Right.
and bad.
Right. Yeah.
Your point
Yeah.
about the social justice factor of, yay, I can work at home and I got a nice comfy chair and Zoom and a laptop, and recognizing that that's a portion of the population. You're absolutely right. One of the things that was happening prior to COVID that was really inspiring for me was that this issue of the housing crisis in California, which is very real, is a banner that was being picked up by a lot of people who hadn't previously, in the decade previous, hadn't been particularly vocal or aware or involved, and a lot of them are young. Many of them are environmental activists who I wouldn't have normally seen at a public hearing advocating for
Or housing.
high density housing.
Yeah.
Right.
So I
Yep.
do think there's a lot of forces coming together, and the COVID thing has helped help facilitate a lot of that dialogue and magnify a lot of the issues.
Right. Right. Or yeah, as you say, it's COVID wasn't necessarily the driver of what's going on, but it did actually sort of uncover some sort of systemic issues that we've had all along, like housing, like inequity and those kind of inequities. Okay, are there more specific things? We keep going back to downtown Ventura, and yeah, Jeff, you want to say something?
No, I don't want to say anything, Mark. I'm very shocked.
No, yeah.
No, I actually think this is something, Mark, you and I worked on in Oxnard, not kind of to jump into another city in the county, is the downtown Oxnard development code.
Right.
And the code itself is transformative for downtown Oxnard. We just now have to realize it. But one of the little things I think that we were able to do, and it showed two things. One, it showed that the government could be flexible. We adopted a code and then immediately started adjusting it. And I think that's one of the things that the government has to have some ability to be flexible and allow some experimentation, because we can't get it right the first time. And then and that's uncomfortable for government, but I think that we have to get there. And then the second is the example of the green alley that your project in downtown Oxnard, we couldn't solve the open space standard. We just couldn't figure out how to get open space to make it work. And we decided that we could actually make the adjacent alley a green alley that met the letter of the code. It got the open space needed to get the project to comply. And it also created an amenity that could be really wonderful in the long term, because it could be the first of many green alleys in Oxnard. So that's another example that's not downtown Ventura, but also I think is something we could replicate.
Right.
It wasn't a COVID experience, but clearly COVID will benefit, the post-COVID world will benefit from those kinds of examples.
Right, and it's interesting, Nick, we've had the last 3 public hearings, we've actually had YIMBY representatives show up and make positive statements about housing. So that's definitely something we could, we haven't seen in the past. And yes, I think that
Mark, I want to say in the last 2 project hearings I've been in, there were more people there in favor of the project than there were opposed to it.
Yeah.
That never happened. Yeah, it just doesn't happen. Now, some of that is because it's a heck of a lot easier to get on Zoom and participate in a public hearing than it is to get in your car, drive to City Hall, park your car, go and sit in a meeting for 2 hours and wait for your item to be up.
right.
So this is one of those things that this pandemic, has opened up. Is we suddenly now, a lot of us have access to a lot of stuff that's going on. You could attend 2 public hearings in one night, if you really for it.
Well, yeah, and you could almost say that Zoom has made those kind of things a little bit more democratic. And in
Yeah.
reality, it's sort of like you're talking about, yeah, you got to get in the car and drive and things like that. But they're also, now you don't have to pay for a babysitter. And now
Yeah.
those kind of things. You can eat at home. You don't have to go out and spend money on those
Yeah.
kind of things.
But again, recognizing what Jeff was saying is not everybody's got a
Exactly.
computer and a laptop with internet, so
Yeah.
we just have to be conscious of that.
Well,
Well,
I was thinking,
do.
oh, go ahead.
And I was just going to mention that because our GPAC, we're having a community workshop tomorrow night as well, and we're trying to get as many people as possible involved. But one of the things we're doing to try to make it more equitable is we're actually providing a place where you can go if you don't have access to the internet, if you don't have a computer, and you can still participate in the meeting. And it's also done in multiple languages. So there's those kind of things too that pre-COVID we would never have thought of. Maybe there'd be an interpreter there or something like that, but you still have to get in the car, you still have to get off work or something like that to experience, to participate.
Yeah, agreed. Well, I was just thinking too, this whole issue of as we are more flexible in our work and play and life, the availability of high-speed internet and broadband, that people, and to make sure that's accessible to everybody so that they can sit in a cafe on Main Street, literally on Main Street, and still function because we have good connectivity everywhere we are.
Yeah, but then again, you have to make that assumption that everybody's going to have a phone or everybody's going to have a laptop or some of that too. So again, for it to be as participatory as possible, you have to make other accommodations. But again, getting back to your point earlier, Jeff, that's where the government can step in. That's where the government can make a difference.
Well, and we've seen just in the last year of the amount of stimulus money going out into this country, and that how much money that has gone into the hands of people to just live their lives, kind of equal the playing field. Nowhere near equal, but at least making some efforts there. I think that's the government intervention.
Now, getting back to being sort of equitable and back to what COVID had done to. Yes, the white collar people can sit with their laptop and sit on their couch and have their Amazon delivered to them and those kind of things. But there still are service workers, there still are restaurant workers, there's still all the back of house type of things. Are there things that we as designers can do to make that part of the equation more equitable moving forward? Right now, we're in a situation where I was having this discussion about housing with somebody. They were concerned that, oh, okay, now we're building affordable housing and we're putting it in locations that are in desirable neighborhoods or whatever. It's sort of like, okay, well, you're either going to have to house them or you're going to have to build a freeway to get them there, and it's.
So I want to understand what you're saying, that there were people complaining because we were putting affordable housing in desirable neighborhoods.
Yes.
So I don't know how to react to that other than to say shame on us.
Yeah, exactly.
Every family deserves to live in a desirable neighborhood. I don't care who you are. I don't care what your income level is. We need to create diverse, integrated neighborhoods. And this is one of the great problems we've had in this country, is that we have planned out diversity. We have eliminated it from our plans. You can only live here if you can afford a single family house. You can only live here if you're willing to live in an apartment and drive 10 miles to get to anything. You can only live over here if you're really down and out and you just can't live in the good neighborhood. So we just have to stop it. And thank God there's a movement, mostly coming from the young, but not just the young, to say enough is enough. We're not going to do that anymore.
Well, and I completely agree with that. And we're looking back again, we were talking prior to this thing about how we've got an entire generation that was, that's addicted to cheap and convenient parking. We've also got entire generations that were excluded from the American dream of being single family homeowners because of FHA rules or lending rules or other sorts of things. That's another one of those systemic inequities that at least now it seems like more of the population is at least becoming sensitive to it.
Yes, and we created a very narrow myth about what the American dream is, and then we built to meet that for the few. And instead of a spectrum of dream, I mean, what's my dream at this point in my life is to live in a somewhat urban area where I can wake up in the morning, go downstairs and get a cafe de latte, at the local. There's lots of different dreams. There's no one dream or one size fits all.
You're not really a latte type, Nick, are you? You're not a latte drinker, are you?
No, actually, well, a soy latte stirred.
Stirred, not shaken, not stirred. But the irony to it, and I think part of the reason that I'm saying the younger generation in quotes has a lot more in common with us seniors is that we're now in a position where we're looking for the same thing.
Yeah.
Earlier, our generation was, okay, you had to have a single family house in a single family neighborhood and 2 cars and 2.5 kids and a dog, and those kind of things. And we're realizing that the sort of cost, social and economic cost of that is not where we want to be. And I think one of the things that I know it came up in a housing conference years ago, that it's the next generation. We've got this entire generation of people that own single family homes and an entire generation that doesn't want to own them.
Yeah.
The next generation coming up doesn't want them.
Yeah.
Well, I think too, one of the things I heard early on in COVID, which always gave me pause, was, well, if we get rid of density, we would be less susceptible to things like COVID. You saw it coming. You could predict that was going to happen, and the answer wasn't. It's not dense. It's not density that causes COVID. It's overcrowding that causes COVID. And if we had more housing, we would have less overcrowding, and we'd be more protected against the next pandemic. But that's too academic for people that are emotionally yelling at the podium against the project. But that's my mind.
But and Nick, you brought up an interesting point, and it seems like, and Jeff, you mentioned the downtown code, the Oxnard downtown code, and I know that Ventura is making steps toward it as well with form-based codes and things like that. How can we sort of push the needle along to more diverse neighborhoods? How do we,
Yeah, and so by the way, there's a question in the chat from Mary Fallenweider about how our experiences being involved in revising general plans, and is this COVID situation informing our experience or affecting our approach to how we're revising general plans? And I guess what I would say that again, as we've been talking, that the pandemic situation has magnified some of these challenges, and it's made the opportunity for people to speak up probably more accessible. So that's a good thing. But to your question, how do we transform neighborhoods? Well, okay, so Jeff, I totally understand why government doesn't want to make mistakes or be too flexible, but I think that's part of the movement, is that we've got to build in some flexibility into our planning process, into our planning, and allow for the spectrum that we're talking about. And I do believe Ventura, and I know other communities, probably Oxnard as well, have begun to build into their plans some flexibility about how much and where we can build, not just housing, but other kinds of uses, and moving, gradually moving away from the single use, single planning kind of strategy. And I think that diversity is critical.
Yeah, and it's kind of, I think that the term that I heard a little while back that seems to apply though is sort of messy vitality. It's like, if you look at a place like State Street in Santa Barbara, or Santa Barbara in particular, is very sort of focused, very sort of homogenized in terms of its architecture and everything like that. But it ends up being, by doing so, it ends up being relatively exclusive. Whereas, you know, if we had, and to get back to part of Mary's question, I know that something that we're looking at in our town has to do more, it's more about, you know, where everybody was freaking out about the regional housing needs numbers and things like that, and where are we going to put all these people and everything like that. But the more we get into this, as we're looking at different opportunities and different opportunity sites and things like that, the idea is to build in as much flexibility into those sites as possible. You know, just by allowing mixed use and making that, even what that's, you know, just saying mixed use all of a sudden opens up, you know, a whole lot of opportunities that we didn't have before. And but most of the cities in Ventura County don't even have any kind of mixed use designation. There's really nowhere other than, you know, again, downtown Ventura, downtown Oxnard, places like that where you can actually even do mixed use.
Well, I think too, Mark, sometimes what cities do is they say mixed use, but then they prescribe what that means.
What that means, exactly.
That prescription that takes away the value of mixed use. And you know, we could think about the midtown corridors in Ventura that have so much required ground floor retail.
Right.
That shop front, and so that was a good idea 10 years ago, 15 years ago, but it doesn't make any sense. And in this world of retail, there's too much retail.
Right.
And so how do we make sure that we're not forcing development to create a retail that's going to die in the middle of a block on Main Street and allow it to go to residential? I think the other piece too is really starting from the public realm, really understanding what the public space is going to be like. Because I think people will be more acceptable of density if they think they're going to they're going to get some amenities and some experiences that come along with it. And I think about when we talk about the west side of Ventura and doing some density over there post the general plan, there was a lot of resistance until we built Kellogg Park. And then as soon as there was a Kellogg Park added to the community, they saw that, oh, we're going to get something out of this. We're going to get some additional amenities. So I think focusing on the public realm gives people a sense that it's just not a bunch of buildings being forced onto the property. They're going to get some other kind of public benefit at the same time. It's helpful.
But now is that what was the genesis of Kellogg Park then? Was that a requirement in the city for a particular developer to actually develop it, or was it how did that come
from the community? It was an uprising from the community saying we don't have enough open space and parkland. And the city heard them.
Yeah.
Good.
And we bought the land. They bought the land. And it was, I forget, Denise, now it's 2.5 acres, I think, 2.25 acres in the middle of a very dense urban mixed use community, mixed income community that's evolving. But you know, it just took a little bit of it was a relief valve for people thinking, oh, you city are just going to put all the density in West Side because you think we don't have a voice. And they certainly had a voice, and the pitchforks came out and the placards came out, and the city bought the land and built a park. So I think that's just, to me, it's a lesson learned that you can actually help take some of the pressure off the development opposition by creating the amenities that go along with it.
Yeah, and those are just public realm, as opposed to, you can say amenities, and then so the developer comes along and puts a swimming pool in it that it's only accessible to, it's got to be public realm.
Really public, because we've learned how important those public places are.
Yeah,
that's why Lynn is so important.
Yes, Lynn.
Yes, Lynn.
We can't live without her. So.
Well, there's a question there from Mary about creating parks. How do we, let's see, it says, how do we allow the community to create flexible, equitable green spaces that lets them make it theirs? And it seems like that's sort of a multi-part question, and it goes to exactly what we were just talking about. There's the one side, there's the part where we need to advocate and we need to create awareness amongst ourselves as design professionals, but also in communities, make them know that they have a voice and let their voices be heard, and do what Kellogg Park did. I think there were lots of charrettes and there was a ton of community input, wasn't there? Yeah. And then we design things that suit the needs of that particular neighborhood, and we keep in mind other tried and true things that really work. When you look at well-used parks, look at the things. I just saw a video on parks today that was talking about we need to design parks that work for 8-year-olds to 80-year-olds, not just fit 30-year-olds. We have to design for everybody, so grandparents can take their grandchildren, and so it's used at all times of the day, which creates safety, and you don't need so much for security. It's just like eyes on the street with mixed use and that kind of thing. And we need to get the input from people, and I think we do need to be willing to make mistakes and then try again and them. I mean, didn't Thomas Edison make 5,000 or something before he invented electricity? Something like that. I mean, we have to be willing to make the mistakes and try again, and really need to work hard to engage our community.
Yeah.
And we have to work as advocates to change policy and to work towards more equitable situations.
I think a lot about Oxnard during we had to shut down the city at the beginning of COVID. That included shutting down the parks and taking the basketball rims off the backboards and taking the swing sets, the swings off the swing sets. And the challenge we were having was not only was the recreation taken away, but those parks are where the families who live in dense apartments celebrate. They celebrate Mother's Day there.
Oh, sure.
There.
And
we worried about the hard shutdown during those upcoming holidays, and
for them there than at home.
Yeah, because that's where they went. That's where they always celebrate their big holidays, is at a picnic table in a park. And you shut down the park. The parks became so much more meaningful to everybody because you saw what was happening when it was taken away from people who desperately used them on a regular basis.
So thank goodness that, this whole shutdown thing does appear, in fact, to be temporary, and it is not the end of humanity.
Yeah. Right.
So, but I think, Lynn, I appreciated what you were saying, but I'd like to suggest that, yes, we need to allow ourselves to, quote, make mistakes, but I'd like to think of it instead of as we need to allow ourselves to evolve. And that
that's a nicer way of putting it.
Yeah, and we can try things and see what works and see what works better and see what doesn't quite work, and we'll figure it out. And it's interesting, isn't it, that some of the most beautiful parks in the world are the parks that are in urban places.
Yeah,
right.
And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that when you're providing an amenity that's serving, a half a mile of dense population, there is a per capita increment of funding available to address that park and to care for that park. Yeah. And there are a lot more people using it, so you're getting a different bang for your buck. One of the challenges we have in Oxnard and in downtown Ventura is that there has not been a lot of land set aside for public parks. So what we've been trying to do in some of our infill projects is carve out corners for little public plazas and little amenities to happen, little places of relief. But at the same time, I've been talking about Mission Park now for many years.
Yeah.
Mission Park is, when it's most of the times it's a kind of a wet sump. It's not a real. Yeah. It's not what the heart of Ventura really wants to be. Yeah. It wants to be a town square. It wants to be a classic Mexican plaza, where you can have a farmer's market and you can have weddings and you can have all kinds of civic celebrations, and the museum could spill out into it with their events. And it is very sorry right now the way it's working. And I hope that, and I think unfortunately it is kind of symbolic of where Ventura has been over the last 50 years. Right. And I don't quite know what that means, but I'm pretty sure it's true. Because it hasn't evolved in a very meaningful, intentional way. And the beauty of good planning is all we're talking about is evolving with intention, not evolving by, oh crap, what happened? How did that get there? Evolving with intention. That's
intention's the key word.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think another way to spin it though is being proactive as opposed to reactive. We don't wait for something bad to happen. Let's be let's plan it and that kind of things. And then if we need to tweak it later on, yes, then it evolves. Then we evolve as we use it.
Well,
Well, maybe moving forward, we could be proactive, but we tried to be proactive about a lot of things, you know, and it was really COVID that forced a lot of these things on us. You know, like we were talking earlier, we were trying to get walkable streets and shut down the streets, et cetera, for years. And it didn't happen until then. So sometimes we need some, you know, something to a catalyst, which
Right.
maybe COVID.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I was thinking, Nick, what you just said really is how we should look about, general plans and planning is an evolution. Too often it's sort of like, well, we have to do a plan. It has to have all these components and check all these boxes, and
Right.
it becomes really bureaucratic. And then with the idea that you finish the plan and then it serves you for 20 years and then you do it all over again, as opposed to this evolution. And I think you're kind of blowing my mind that we should change the way we do planning. From every 20 years we put a plan in place instead of that doing it every year or two in some incremental evolution based on the last year's experience.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
It would be amazing.
If it could be this fluid process.
Yeah.
That responded to the community as we need it to.
Yeah.
2
Well,
years, 5 years, whatever it is, it's,
Well, and as the city evolves or the community evolves, and as the stakeholders evolve, the plan should be able to be flexible enough to do that, to do that, as opposed to this is a time capsule done by, you know, all the powers that be, and it just gets, you know, it ends up on the shelf for 20 years, and then we go through this process all over again.
I don't-
interesting.
Go ahead, Nick.
Just it's fascinating to me to note that most of the places in Ventura, and probably in Oxnard and probably in other communities, most of the places that we really love were created before there was a plan.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling. Downtown Ventura did not have a parking standard when it was built. In the 1920s, there was no parking standard.
Not so many cars either.
Okay.
Well, if you look at photos of 1920, you'll see all these diagonal. I mean, I'm amazed, actually. I like to think that was true, but there were a lot of cars.
Yeah. I hate to say this, this is a really engaging discussion. Are there, and maybe I don't hate to say this, but are there attendees that want to get involved, have questions that they can ask us?
Yeah, all 2 of them, 3 of them.
We have a couple of questions, and what I can do is throw those questions your way because they're directed at the entire panel, and
Okay.
then turn it back. Hopefully that will just a couple of questions. One from Jonathan McGee wanting to talk about, you've all mentioned free and or affordable parking. Are there rules in place to not overbuild without accessible parking? For the layperson, what are those rules? So there's the first question.
And it's a loaded question because without accessible parking. So the assumption would be that we really shouldn't build unless we can park. And that's and I understand it because it's the way we have grown and evolved in especially in California and especially in Southern California. But when we look at the cost and the damage that we've done to our communities by insisting that everything is car accessible, it's pretty tragic.
Yeah.
So I would request that yes, we still need to provide some parking, but I would like to see some places within the community where no parking was required. Those could be very specific, and they could be located along the corridors where the transit stops are. And to just say in those areas, you could build housing where people who don't own cars could live and could get to things.
Mhm.
And we have plenty of development that's car oriented. We got lots of it. Let's build some that's not car oriented, and let's experiment. Let's try it. And
Right.
it's not going to ruin the city if it doesn't quite work.
Mhm.
Pull back, but we haven't allowed ourselves to do that.
Yeah. I think of Harvest Cafe at the Wave.
Mm-hmm.
They have no parking. it's hard to have parking there, and they do really well.
Yeah.
Because they have a product that people want, and people will find a way to get there, even if they have to walk, God forbid, or ride their bike. And because nobody's living, except for the Wave, there's nobody living right there right now, but they found a way to be successful without parking. So it's possible, you know.
Plan ahead.
Huh?
You plan ahead. You're like,
Yeah.
oh, I want to go to Harvest Cafe. Okay, I'll park my car over here, or I will walk or ride my bike, or
Yeah.
Or we'll go together. I'll pick you up
together. Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
One car, we're not going to meet there. Right. I mean, so there are good examples where cars are not needed and businesses don't die. So
I do appreciate that question, by the way. I didn't,
sure.
to bash the questioner. It's a good catalyst question.
Yeah,
it is. And having lived and worked in and around downtown Ventura, and knowing that the conversation in the community right now, it's all of these projects, all the infill projects that have been in the plans for 15 plus years are all under construction at exactly the same time. So you've got everybody kind of losing their minds about where are all these people going to park their cars, although we've been looking at dirt-filled lots for a dozen years, and we're finally seeing some progress and growth, right?
Yes, and of course those projects have parking.
Yes.
Right.
But the objective is that those people can live there and not get in that car.
Right.
They, those are people we hope, and I think ultimately the market is the thing that bears it out, that many of those people will live and work in the downtown, and they will not have to get in their car and use a downtown parking space, because they're going to leave their car in the garage of the project, and they're going to walk 3 blocks to get to their place of work.
Well, and then it's also one of those, if you build it, they will come. You provide all that parking in areas that are adjacent to transit. All of a sudden, the transit ridership is going to change, and that's going to spur additional investment in additional transportation. So it's a positive storm.
And also, I'm actually surprised we haven't seen as many like sort of micro unit projects in Ventura.
Right.
Because we have so many. I mean, you don't need to build a big project with a bunch of private amenities, because you have a thing called the ocean right down the street, where you can build multiple, where the individual private living space is fairly small and modest and affordable, without having it to be restricted just because of the size of the space, because everything they need to do is in walking distance nearby, and they can live very comfortably in that kind of environment.
I think we will start to see more of those, Jeff, and that's a good example of the kind of development that could occur at a transit node without parking, a micro unit.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
affordable
and
by design, affordable by how compact it is.
But that's also then, but their parking standards are one thing, but we also have unit size requirements and things like that in other cities as well. So, there's a little bit of heavy lifting we have to do, and those kind of peripheral things that would, prevent us, say in the city of Oxnard, from doing a 350 square foot micro unit when you can't build a multifamily unit in the city of Oxnard that's less than 700 square feet.
Sure, we're great at writing rules to prevent ourselves from evolving.
Right, exactly.
Right. Well, that
Another
was another question.
Yeah, I have another question. This came in through our Facebook live stream. So this is a question from Vera de Vera. As someone who grew up in Oxnard and graduated from UCLA's urban planning program, she currently lives in LA County now. I'm loving this conversation. And how are you good people helping inspire and engage the next generation of urban planners, community engagement professionals from the neighborhoods in the region who have traditionally not engaged in land use planning and policy work?
Love that question.
That's a great question.
Can we hire Vera to help us do that?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Vera, I teach at Ventura College, and at least half of my students are young Latina and Latino, and they are so engaged, and they are so interested in helping change the world. And I teach a sketching class, but I can't help it. I'm constantly teaching and talking about urbanism and the evolution of our cities. So I'm really, frankly, it's just a joy to be able to do that. And I feel like I'm cheating by, adjusting the curriculum to meet my intentions.
Yeah. And to add to that also, though, I know Jeff and I actually gave a talk about what RENA numbers mean, and it was to design professionals.
It was a great talk.
there's a whole, it's like even within our profession, we have people that either aren't engaged or don't understand how this part of the process works, or those kind of things, or but yes, teaching is essential. We do that as well. Job shadowing whenever possible, those kind of things. But also, having these kind of discussions, even, and having the museum leverage it out into social media to get the discussion going.
Yeah.
So another question, because we've been talking a lot about affordable housing and parks, but when we're looking at the kind of suburban sprawl that has plagued the county, what are some of the other amenities that we should be looking at for these? I'm thinking about East Ventura. I know that the complaint for as long as I've lived here is that anybody, we don't exist if we live east of Victoria, right? There's nothing for us out here. We have nothing but these, crazy little grocery store shopping centers. And how do we start looking at the community as a whole and creating these actual communities within the cities, right? In and around neighborhoods.
Yeah. Just welcome to the East County.
Yeah.
All right.
But yeah, I think, other amenities, transit, allowing people to have ways to get from one place to another without having to get in a car, or by be able to walk, or things like making streets safer, making pedestrian, getting the ability to from a multimodal perspective, being able to walk, being able to bike, being able to do something without having to get in a car. Those should be considered amenities as well.
Yeah, I just learned the other day that the city of Oxnard has had 5 bike fatalities so far this calendar year.
Yep.
And it's not a very bike-friendly place. It's flat, and that's great, but the network of connectivity in Oxnard is not there. There are pockets where it's better than others, and it's just the way the city has evolved. So how do we better connect the community in using additional bike trails, making the streets more bike friendly, more pedestrian friendly, giving people an alternative? East Ventura needs a way to get people, they're experimenting with the bike lane along Telephone that's in the street with bollards. It's a little bit of a hybrid, but it gives at least a bike a path to go from one part of the city to the other and get to those amenities. And then frankly, there's land left that's not yet developed to really hold that land for that sort of place. Nick's been working on one particular block for a long time. And it's one of those places where the economics simply don't work for what the community would. Literally the community was upset that they weren't getting a Gelson's.
Right.
Well, you might get a tractor store, but you're not going to get a Gelson's there. There's not the demand for it. So but maybe holding land in some way to make sure that there's land available when there's enough demand to actually deliver that sense of community that the community wants.
Well, but I see there's even opportunity there. You talk about doing things in increments. I know every city has what's the leftovers of a redevelopment agency. And in many cases, they are in fact landowners of small, or limited development opportunity potential that could be converted into pocket parks. So, there's other opportunities as well like that.
You were saying earlier about parking, weren't you saying that, was it 12% of parking spaces are used at one time or something like that? When you think about certain shopping malls that have huge parking lots that are underutilized, maybe there's a way to turn pockets of that into a community space or a park, or ways just to search out the little spots that we might be. If we had like-minded people in all levels, citizens, community members, professionals, government agencies working together to look for those things, we could probably come up with it. When there's a will, and when you're intentional, there's a will, there's a way. We could be advocating for those kinds of things, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think Vera, back to Vera's question about engaging the younger population in this conversation in the planning world, it doesn't have to be we're engaging planning students either. It could be citizen
Right.
planners. And,
Oh,
Sure.
and
yeah.
I think the more that, my sense of the younger generation, I'm unfortunately not there anymore, is the more they want to see a response to their concern. They want to see action, or they move on to something else or some other place. And so the more we can actually deliver a response to their concerns. If their concerns are better bike connectivity, let's improve bike connectivity.
Right.
They actually see that there's value in their activism, and they're going to do more of it to
Sure.
engage the community.
Well, that goes back to your thing about doing things in increments. The last thing you want to do is wait until a general plan update to put a bike lane in.
Right. Yeah.
I think one of the challenges that we have, and I don't think it's exclusive to our region, but the fact that we have the different cities doing their plans,
Yeah.
and we have the county doing a plan, and we have the transportation commission doing their plan, and everybody's, they kind of talk to each other, but there isn't any real concerted, here's our countywide strategy, and each city has a role to play in helping realize this. And how we come, it's been very hard to get the cities to work together to get things to integrate. And Jeff, I know you've had experience.
Yeah.
Well, I would say too, before I left Oxnard, actually Gold Coast Transit was doing exactly that. They actually kicked off their master plan process by inviting all the cities to the table. And because God forbid we talk about transit and land use in the same conversation. And that's what they were doing. They were actually bringing the people in charge of land use to the table to say, where are you headed with land use? We want to make sure our transit serves that same those same corridors. So I think there are examples of that collaboration, not a lot, but I think, and not a lot of results yet. But
well, and I guess that goes back to Mark's and my roles, as we are participating in the general plan updates, and frankly, every citizen who attends those sessions, to say, hey, what about that, planners, and what about that, transportation folks? Are you, how do we integrate that into our plan now? How do we make this part of our, and the challenge is right now, public transit really is not part of our culture.
Right.
It is something we have to do. It is something we do for those who cannot afford some other way of getting around. It's just not a priority or a real care, honestly, at a lot of levels.
Right. Right.
I
I would definitely agree with that. I think one of the issues that we have as Ventura County, though, is we have the county is it's really large geographically, as opposed to having, Inglewood, Lakewood, all these cities sort of butting up against each other. That's very sort of limited where that's happening.
That means we have to do more planning and more care.
For sure. But then we also have the naysayers that say that, okay, if you improve transportation between my city of Moorpark and 20 miles away in the city of Ventura, that's growth inducing for everything that happens in between the two. And it's just.
And widening the freeway isn't.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, and I think I worked in government in Ventura County for, I think, 12 years, and once in 12 years we had an all-city meeting with all the city managers and all the planning directors together in one room to talk about housing strategy. And it was really about the RENA numbers, the housing numbers, and it was frankly to probably avoid a fight among cities about pushing housing to different jurisdictions. But I just thought the first time we actually all sat around a room together and talked about how we should work together on housing policy in Ventura County, it shouldn't take 12 years for that conversation to happen.
Right.
I do know that the Ventura County planners were trying to get a lot of regional participation, and I'm not sure how successful they were, but they were definitely trying.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Maybe
another question in there.
Mandated at the state level. Maybe that's what has to happen.
With ADUs.
Well, that's how we got the RENA numbers, and that's what drove the affordable housing thing to the forefront, was the big, the stick from the state.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think that was our last question from the audience, and we're coming up on 7:35. I know we were talking about landing on time, so I'm going to let the panel say some final words, and then we'll do a little public service announcement for Nick's talk, which is going to be coming up on June 23rd. So those of you tuning in tonight, please come back for transformative adaptation during COVID, and look for, I'll just give you guys a couple of dates. The museum will be reopening all of our outdoor spaces because we have lots of underutilized outdoor space that we have been busily getting ready to invite the public back to. We have a major planting party and I think an impromptu jam session happening behind the museum right now with Art City folks who are planting their community garden. And those spaces will open June 3rd, and the museum will open indoor galleries July 1st after 15 months of closure. So we're very excited
Congratulations.
to
Very exciting.
take advantage of the downtime to really look at our space and find ways to make it more enticing and accessible.
That's awesome.
I'd like to just close by saying thank you, Denise. And
Yes.
thank you, Museum of Ventura County. I am so excited about the transformation and evolution you guys have been going through, and the role that the new kind of meaning that you can bring for your organization in our community. It's really quite awesome. And thank you for hosting this and bringing us together and letting us connect and share. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you for being here tonight. We couldn't do it without you. And our goal is to really start to share the voices of Ventura County. It's what we should have been doing for years, as opposed to capturing the old stories. It's like, let's capture history today and let's share it today. So
Let's make history today.
let's make history today.
I hope we can continue the dialogue. I feel like it's super. I don't want it to go sweep by the wayside. I hope we can convert this into action.
I agree.
Yeah.
Keep talking. And
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. Thanks to the museum. I think Lynn's right. How do we keep this conversation going? And I think, my thought is we should just keep thinking about what do we like about COVID. I know that's an odd question, but there's a lot we didn't like. But what did we appreciate about COVID experience, and how do we keep it going
Yeah.
in policy and the real world? I think because there's a lot of things that we lost a lot of people. It's been a rough year, but we've shined light on a lot of dysfunction that we tried to ignore before COVID. But we also should learn from that experience and learn from what we liked about it and how to keep it going.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
the silver linings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
Exactly.
you, Mark, for bossing us around.
I
Yes.
simply want to point out that Jeff talked more than I did.
Did you watch on your stopwatch, Nick? Did you have for you timing?
He's keeping score. Keeping score. Again, thank you very much to all the panelists. Thank you to Denise and the museum for actually putting this on. Thank you to the Ventura AIA for helping sponsor this. And yes, we have to continue this dialogue. And yeah, I would agree with Jeff. Start by saying what did we do what do you like about what just happened? So, and just keep it going. And it's we talked earlier about momentum, and it seems like there is some now, which there hasn't been in a long time, and so we should take advantage of it. And for the panelists that asked earlier about what can the young people do, call any one of us. We'll keep that conversation going for sure.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
care.
Have a good night.
Bye. Thank you.